I've had many people write to me, text me, approach me in general about wanting to move to Turkey with their families and often with young kids. Now, this makes me really excited. I love sharing my love of this beautiful adoptive country of mine with other people, because I want to make sure I'm not only painting a completely one-sided, positive, bright, sunny picture of Turkey. So today I wanted to talk about Turkey's educational system. I'm Cecile, and this is my channel From Canada to Adana. So before we get into it, let me give you a little bit of background information why I feel in a position to talk to you about this subject. I am an educator. I have worked in this country for 14 years in private high schools. I'm also a mother. I have 3 sons, as many of you already know from listening to my past videos. My kids have only ever gone to school in Turkey. However, they have been in the German system, the international system, and these past 3 years in the Turkish system. So I want to talk about the Turkish system specifically, but I do have a broad base on which to compare my knowledge of the different systems. I'll also just preface by saying that any problems that I discuss today, these are problems that for me in the moment, we are making the situation work for our family, for our kids. Every place has problems, and it would be very easy and maybe simplistic for me to look at Canada, Ontario specifically, where I grew up, and compare the educational systems and say, well, you know, if we went back to Toronto, to Canada, we wouldn't have any of these problems. But I need to remind myself, and so I want to remind you as well, that problems that exist here, while they may not exist elsewhere, in places like Canada, in Toronto, there are other problems. So no place is perfect, at least not in my opinion, for what I want. And so sometimes making a decision to put up with something that's less than ideal comes, of course, with other benefits. So again, you've listened to my other videos, you know that I love living in Turkey, and our lives here are enriched in so many different ways because of living here. And so, you know, one always has to keep in mind that balance when looking at drawbacks or negatives. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. If you enjoy this video or find it helpful, please do click that thumbs up button. It really helps this video get seen by a broader audience. And if you haven't already subscribed, do that too, because then you'll get notified every time a new video comes up. I'm a bit busy these days teaching. I try to put a new video up every week. It doesn't always happen, but that's the goal. All right, so as I speak about the education system in Turkey today, I'm going to try and stick to the facts, but I am human, and as I said, I'm a mother and a teacher, so my own opinion is going to inevitably creep in sometimes, but I am really going to do my best to try and present an objective perspective and stick to the facts. So the first point I'd like to make about the Turkish education system is that it is a one-size-fits-all system. The Ministry of Education is a central body run out of the capital city, Ankara, and it governs every province or region of Turkey down, you know, to every city, to every town, to every neighborhood. So it is very centralized. In Canada, famously in Finland, the education system is regional. So different regions can adapt the system to their own needs. So that is not the case here. Turkish people take this a step further. The curriculum is set. There is very little wiggle room. So to give you an example, all grade 1 students learning to read and write in a particular school, let's say there are 3 grade 1 classes, they will all be learning letter A on the same day, and they will all be learning letter B on the same day, and so on. But not only everyone at that school, everyone at the school down the road, at the school across the city, at the school across the country. So it's very much every student across the country in the same grade is covering the same units. This was made especially clear during this pandemic when, of course, the the ministry prepared some online classes for the kids who were studying from home. And, it was one television channel streaming for the public schools in Turkey, streaming the lessons for every child across the country. So not only is every child in Turkey covering the same topics, but generally there is just a methodology of input. The teacher provides the input and the students are expected to recall. So that is my first point. The Turkish system is very much a one-size-fits-all system. This ties directly to my second point, which is that the Turkish education system is test-based. So there are key tests at different points in a child's career, in a child's education. I'm not going to go too specifically into those because a quick Google search can give you all the information you need. But for example, every child in Turkey writes an exam in grade 8 to get into a good high school. Now, that's not to say if you fail the exam, you don't get into a high school, but there are some high schools in Turkey that are so excellent and getting into them is so competitive that your score on this grade 8 exam is very key. It really matters. Now, again, I'm really simplifying this. So those of you who are familiar with the Turkish situation, forgive me. I know that this grade 8 test has changed over the years. It's gone from one single exam in grade 8 to an exam in grade 6, an exam in grade 7, an exam in grade 8. There's a very complicated formula for combining the weights. At one point, I think it was, 25% in grade 6, 25% in grade 7, 50% in grade 8. There have at times been, there's been some inclusion of grade point average in there. Again, it changes a lot. And so at this point, I don't want to give any specific details except to say that the Turkish education system is very exam-based. This type of exam continues. You get into university based on an exam. You get into a graduate school based on an exam. You can become a civil servant based on such an exam, etc., etc. So very exam-based. My own children in the Turkish system right now, my middle child is in grade 4, and he this year is already starting these kind of practice exams. My son in grade 5 this Saturday has his first kind of, middle school. It's a pretty serious practice exam. It's going to be 2 hours on a Saturday. This is going to happen several times throughout the school year. And again, it's the way I see it, and please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, but I see here the purpose of these practice exams being number one, for students to improve their test-taking skills, to maybe, get so experienced taking tests that they aren't as nervous when the exam is a really critical one. Like, this is a practice exam, like I said, so my son's grade on Saturday is hardly going to impact his future. And the other point is just to keep the kids practicing all the information, and I'll get to that in a minute, but making sure they keep all the content that they've learned fresh in their minds. So again, my son is in grade 5, and in theory for the next 4 years before he writes that big high school entrance exam, he's going to be having these regular exams. So it's all geared towards the exams. Because the curriculum is pretty tight packed, this leaves little room for, for things beyond practice taking tests and test taking. There is no or very little essay writing, doing presentations, practicing your public speaking, no units of inquiry, right? No real room for developing habits of mind, skills development. These are all things that, coming from a different school system, I, as a parent, certainly want. So I've already kind of transitioned into step 3, which is that the Turkish system is very content based. So I guess I'll just go back and say that was point 2 and point 3. Very much focused on making sure every child in Turkey who has, a grade 4 education knows the same things. A grade 6 education knows the same things. Very content-based because the government, the ministry wants to know that its citizens have a baseline level of education. The fourth point I want to make is about the books. So the Ministry of Education in Turkey provides free books for every child, and these books are printed new each year. Public schools hand out these books to children, but what I see private schools doing is also creating their own book list and requiring their students to also buy a list of books from independent publishers. And so I will include here a list of my grade 4 son's books and my grade 5 son's books. Sorry, not a list, but like a photo of their bookshelves, just to give you the idea of how many books it is. Now, for me, this is problematic because number one, no one is reusing these books. So these books literally get, recycled every year, or even worse, thrown in the garbage. Paper is really expensive in Turkey. In fact, I heard that Turkey is now importing all its paper goods. Again, someone could fact check that for me, please. But, growing up in Canada where lumber is a huge natural resource, we still are very careful about our consumption of paper goods. And that is not the case here. So, I don't even want to dare to take a guess of how many tons of books are produced each year and then just thrown out or recycled at the end of the year. When I was in school, we had textbooks that we wouldn't write in them, and at the end of the year, we would hand them back in. And sometimes a textbook would be maybe 10 years old. Maybe that's not acceptable nowadays, but I just find the way my kids are, the way they're marking up their textbook, which are, again, a lot of practice tests, and then I can't even hand them down to the next child the following year because number one, they've been written in. Number two, they are often changed and revised because these textbooks have to reflect any changes that were made by the ministry that year for these big tests, these big standardized tests. So in the case of my kids, the grade 8 test, the high school entrance exam. Again, these tests all have names, they're acronyms, and I can never keep them straight. The other thing that really kind of just triggers me every time is the cost of these books. I am not exaggerating. I spend thousands of lira every year on my kids' books. This is obviously a choice insofar as that we have chosen to send our kids to a private school. But again, I think just having grown up in Canada, maybe I have a bit more of a socialist mindset on this issue. It pains me that this is like a 3-tiered system, and I'll explain why I say 3-tiered, but actually just for simplicity's sake, let's call it a 2-tier system, so public school, private school, because there is a difference in the quality of education, in my opinion, and the fact the private schools clearly don't feel that the ministry-issued books are sufficient. So let me say a few things about this 2-tier or 3-tier system. Private schools in Turkey are for the most part private enterprises, which means they are businesses. They have to care about the bottom line. No matter how great their mission statement, their ethos, their values might be, they are at the end of the day for-profit organizations, and they have to, make a profit. They have to pay their teachers. They have to pay for their buildings. I don't know if they're getting any government support. I don't know. I understand that private schools in Canada do still get some government support. There are a few private schools in Turkey which are foundations. So that's a different category. These are technically, I think, not-for-profit organizations, they still have to think very much like a business, or the school will have to close. So yeah, there's that, which for me makes it hard to imagine how the school can always have education as the only criterion when making decisions. Public schools, by contrast, are obviously not-for-profit. I look around at some of the public schools where I live. Some have more resources than others. Generally, Turkish schools, I think, are pretty bare bones, and a village school might have way less resources than a school in a city in an affluent area. Again, I don't know how decisions are made within the ministry in terms of budgets and allocation of monies, but I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that the public schools in Turkey are adequately funded. Now, maybe that's something you could say about schools in Canada too, schools elsewhere around the world. But in terms of the necessary supplies, I think a lot of teachers are paying out of pocket for supplies for their students. The reason I refer to a 3-tier system is that we could break this down probably infinitely. Within public schools, like I said, a village school might be further down the ladder than a city public school, but even private schools, you've got sort of like different tiers, certainly in terms of price point, but also in terms of, the quality of teachers they hire, whether or not they hire foreign teachers. So you've got sort of like really sort of upper echelon private schools, and then you've got just a large group of, I'll call them just middle tier private schools. I think most middle class families in Turkey choose to send their kids to a private school, but that doesn't mean these families are necessarily wealthy, and so there are hundreds, thousands of private schools, often chains, but those schools are affordable to a huge part of the Turkish population. So I'll just call those middle tier private schools. So that's why I talk about a multi-tier system. So the last point that I will make about the Turkish public school system, and I mentioned this already earlier on when I talked about content, is because the curriculum is content-based and it is centrally determined, there are things that I, coming from the education system of another country, and that I as a mother would like my kids to be taught in school, but they are not. So these include things like habits of mind, being inquisitive, being a problem solver, looking at things sort of like playing devil's advocate. You can Google habits of mind and you'll see a huge list of them. These are now being included in the curriculum of many schools around the world, most notably maybe international schools. But as far as I can see, this is not being taught. Other skills, what we often refer to as 21st century skills, so collaborating, teamwork, I mentioned problem solving. These are things that I would like my kids to be learning at school, but they are not. So in conclusion, I think I can say that the education system in Turkey has been developed to meet the needs of this country. In the past, there was a need to unify this country. It's a large country. There are still areas that are very remote. I can well imagine that the mandate was to bring education to areas of the country where formerly there was no formal education. So that's all I will say about that. Again, I hope I've stuck to the facts and not put too much of my own personal opinion into here. Again, my kids are currently in this system and we are not unhappy. We are happy with our school. My kids are happy with their school. So, in the past, I've painted a very positive picture of our lives here. I hope I haven't today gone and flipped everything on its head and painted a very negative picture. But these are realities that I think are worth discussing if you're in education, if you're a parent, if you're thinking of coming here with kids and putting them in the Turkish system. These are things that it has taken me over a decade to kind of, decode and figure out. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you found this useful or interesting, please do give it the thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed, don't forget to do so. And see you next week. Bye.